Welcome to Candid Chats on Cancer. I'm Mary Robinson.
I'm Jamie Moore. Mary, who are we chatting with today?
We are chatting with Jody O'Doherty from Nebraska Medicine. We're so glad that you are here with us today.
Welcome,
Could you please
Jody.
tell us what you do?
I'm an oncology social worker, so I work with general oncology patients and primarily bone marrow transplant patients right now.
And actually, I have to say, Jamie, Jody was my social worker when I was in the hospital, and she
Really?
is absolutely amazing. Yes. So that's how I know Jody.
She talked a lot about you. We have a lot of conversations when she was in the hospital, and you know, I was sick at the same time she was, except I was home. And she's always touted you as a very important person through her journey through cancer.
Well, thank you.
I'm sure it's that way for all of her patients or clients. I don't know what you call them.
They're
but
my patients.
your patients. Okay.
Yeah.
So, what is it you do for diagnosis? From the minute we get the diagnosis, is there something that you can help that cancer, the diagnosis of cancer anyway, is scary?
Definitely. And so my role as a social worker is to come alongside and try and provide support for patients and family members. And particularly for transplant patients and families, I do a psychosocial assessment where I can get a chance to get to know you a little bit. And that helps me to know what's going on in your life in addition to the cancer, and what your journey is going to look like and what concerns you have. And then I try and come alongside and provide resources or just offer support emotionally, as well as help with discharge planning if that's needed too. So I have a broad scope of things that I do.
You really do.
She really does, and she's right on top of things. I know you sent me a lot of resources. She also helped with getting ready for, you know, like Social Security type stuff, just any sort of planning that we needed. Jody was there, and things that we didn't think of, because I think a lot of us have a lot on our plates when we're going through this, and I wouldn't have thought of half the things that you suggested that we checked into for help.
Sure.
Yeah.
Definitely. Anything non-medical is what a social worker focuses in on, to try and come alongside and help with what the doctors and nurses are doing.
Now, how can you help us cope with being in the hospital? You say you primarily work with bone marrow recipients or people, and so they're in the hospital for a long period of time.
Definitely. So in addition to just coming alongside and making sure that their needs are met, they're not worrying about finances, they have resources to help their kids or to get those concrete resources if they have to come for a distance, helping them with lodging and that kind of thing. But a big part of my job is trying to kind of get a sense of what helps them to cope, because everybody copes differently.
Yes.
And everybody's coping style, they have to figure out what works best for them. And so that's my goal, is just providing a listening ear, helping them talk about what they're feeling and maybe process some of that.
So you first come up with an assessment, what you call a psychosocial assessment.
Right, exactly.
Can you explain a little bit what the psychosocial
Sure.
part of it is?
It's kind of our way of getting to know that patient. And so finding out a little bit about your background, your likes, your dislikes, what works for you. Do you like a lot of information about your condition, or do you just want basics? Because information is too much if it's too detailed.
Yes.
Who do you have in your life that are support people for you? And that's a big part of what social work does, is we look at the person as a whole and also look at what needs your family might have through this process as well.
And also, you wanted to talk to us about coping with, coping with cognitive restructuring.
Right.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So cognitive restructuring is just a fancy term for a coping style. And as I mentioned, we all need to try different things and figure out what works best for us. Some people use meditation, some people talk about their feelings, some people seek information as a way of coping. Cognitive restructuring is actually a process of altering a negative emotional response to an event by becoming aware of negative thoughts and purposely changing them to a positive or rational thought that helps you have a greater sense of well-being.
Wow.
So in other words, how you think about something makes a big difference on how you feel about it or how you cope with it.
We talk a lot about that on a lot of our shows,
Yeah.
is positive thinking.
Right.
Is that
Positive
what
attitude.
you're kind of talking about? Or?
It's positive thinking, but it's realistic thinking. If you tell yourself everything is going to be perfectly fine, but you don't know that for sure, then that's not helpful, because that's not a truthful statement. But you could tell yourself that this is going to be a process. You're going to take one step at a time. You're going to follow the doctor's advice. You're going to lean on family. You're going to rely on your faith. Those kinds of statements help you to feel a little bit more grounded, a little bit more in control, rather than thinking this is terrible, awful, horrible, miserable. And so what you choose to think about makes a big difference on how you cope.
That makes sense.
So, okay, you said a whole lot in one sentence there. It's teaching the brain how to look at cancer from a realistic point of view, to become realistically, to give yourself a better opportunity to become healthy?
Right. It's a way of helping yourself to process and cope. So, for example, if you think about your cancer experience as terrible, awful, horrible, miserable,
Right.
you focus in on that. The more you think about that, you're going to feel depressed, anxious, hopeless, fearful, right? In reality, to be honest with you, there are days that it is terrible, awful, horrible, miserable. And I'd be the first one to say that patients and family members need to take time to grieve, and need to take time to express those emotions. When you feel angry or sad or scared, you need to talk about it. You need to express it and sit with it for a little bit. But then there becomes a point to where if you dwell on that, it's not helpful any longer. And so you can camp there, and then you really are struggling with the emotions because you're not giving yourself any hope in that. So really what cognitive restructuring is a way of coaching yourself. So in that situation, rather than again focusing on terrible, awful, horrible, miserable, you may again tell yourself statements that are more helpful, like, I trust my doctors, he's telling me what I need to do, I'm doing everything I can do right now, I just need to relax. Or I'm going to pray about this and put it in God's hands. A lot of people do cognitive restructuring and don't even realize it.
Right.
They use their own mottos, they use their own phrases, like you hear patients say a lot of times, I'm going to take this one day at a time. That's cognitive restructuring.
Right.
That's a way of putting it, taking this big experience and putting it into a narrow, controllable, I can cope with one day, I can't look at the whole journey.
Exactly.
And so it's a way of helping yourself to cope.
And then until you get over that hump, then you can cope on the next little
Exactly.
bit that comes up.
Exactly. It's making it more manageable. So it's choosing thoughts that are, again, more helpful.
It's not so overwhelming.
Right.
Because I think a lot of us are so overwhelmed at first. All this is coming in, and what do we do next? How do we save ourselves? And, you know,
Yeah,
it's just too much.
Exactly.
We think more of the war than the day-to-day battles.
Exactly.
And it sounds like you're helping people set realistic goals.
Right. And, you know, we all have thoughts that can become distorted or irrational. And
Yes.
cognitive restructuring, if you're really doing that, and a lot of times people go to counselors to figure out how to actually practice it in their everyday life. But one of the types of distorted thinking is catastrophizing. And so patients can easily fall into that, where you're thinking of all the what ifs. If this happens, and this could happen, and what if this happens, and
Every
this
night.
could happen? And then you become very overwhelmed and scared and
Yes.
anxious. That is so normal. Every patient, every family member will experience that at some point. But cognitive restructuring, if you really practice it, you can learn how to catch yourself right at the top of that before you let it spiral, and remind yourself, okay, this isn't a helpful thought. Going down the path of what ifs isn't going to help me. I'm going to take a nice deep breath. I'm going to focus on something else right now. Or I'm going to take the next step, do what I can do in this moment, and figure out the next step tomorrow. something more manageable.
Mm-hmm. Do you suggest certain activities or anything, like if somebody was going down that spiral, does it help to busy themselves with something, or does it help to just be?
Diversion is a wonderful tool. Gets your mind off of it, gets you busy doing something else. Relaxation techs, breathing, those kinds of techniques can really help. But diversion is a wonderful tool, focusing in on something else, or bringing family around that bring you joy, doing something that you enjoy to kind of offset some of the other things that you have to do. Cognitive restructuring is not something that most people can just do at a flip of a switch. It's something you have to kind of practice.
Right.
And so there's actually a way of practicing cognitive restructuring where it can become more powerful in your life. And that is sitting down and putting on an alarm for just 3 minutes, and sitting down and thinking about something that generally causes you some anxiety. For example, a lot of my patients will worry about a biopsy result, or worry about the yearly appointment and fear of recurrence and all of those kinds of things. So you turn on that timer for 3 minutes, you sit and think about things like you normally would, but I want you to then at that point really focus in on what's happening in your body. Are you starting to feel like your shoulders are getting tight, your head's hurting, you're a little nauseated, or you're getting kind of clammy hands, are you feeling anxious? What's going on with you? And then when the alarm goes off, you audibly say, stop. And then at that point, you choose a thought that's more helpful. Okay, so I don't have the results of my biopsy. It's not helpful for me to worry about that at this point in time. It's not going to change the outcome. So I'm going to choose to do something I enjoy doing with my family. And tomorrow I'm going to trust that my doctor's going to have my next steps, whatever the results are.
So
That's
wonderful.
an important point, isn't it? Because we spend a lot of time worrying over things we don't have control over in general.
Right.
Now, at nighttime, seems to be the worst time for a lot of people with cancer, and it is we get stuck in that what ifs.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we can do at night to help restructure our thought patterns?
Right. If you practice that exercise, what you're going to start to realize is in your everyday life and at night when things are quiet, you're going to, when you catch your body doing those things or you catch your mind spiraling, you'll actually catch yourself in the act, and you'll hear that little voice. That's why I say do it audibly. You'll hear the little voice saying stop. And at that point, you can start to say, okay, it's not helping me to worry about it. I need to do some relaxation techniques. So maybe working on your breathing at that point. Or some people actually have to, if they're really having trouble sleeping, even getting out of bed and just focusing on something like a silly TV show for just a few minutes, just to refocus the mind, get the mind off of what you're thinking of, can really help. I know some people say don't get out of bed and don't do that, but I found that if you're really having trouble with your thoughts and they just won't shut up, then sometimes if you turn on just a silly show and not even focus in on it as much as you're just kind of watching what's in front of you, it'll turn that little tape off and help you to refocus. And then when you go back to bed, just work on the breathing. All I need to do is breathe.
So is that just kind of like, in another word for it, like a redirection of your brain? And I'm just trying to, I guess, trying to capture the understanding of how your mind can impact the body.
So what tends to happen, most people think that when there's an event, there's an emotion. But in reality, there's a thought that happens in between. So have you ever been in a situation where you've been in a car and you are running late?
Never.
And you know,
Not at all.
you know that if you don't get going, you're going to be late, so you are speeding and you are going as fast as you can. Intense. You are, and all of a sudden you look in your rearview mirror and you see the flashing lights and you hear the sirens, and all of a sudden you start to feel sick to your stomach, your hands get clammy, your heart's racing, and you're thinking, now I'm really going to be late. My boss is going to be angry. Now I'm going to get a ticket. It's going to take me twice as long to get where I need to go. And you're just feeling sick inside. So you kind of slowly slow down, and that police car goes right past you.
Oh, that's a happy ending
Yes,
so far.
What happened? But what happened?
You're in a whole bunch of you were stuck in a pattern of negative thoughts.
Right, your thoughts already assumed. It's what you were thinking that actually caused the physiological response in your body. What you think about makes a difference. So, given another example, if you're driving in a car and a guy veers over in your lane and almost hits you, you're thinking, that guy could have killed me, he could have smashed my car, I would have had all this debt, and I'm going to start to feel really angry. I'm going to be fuming at that point, right?
Right.
But what if you're driving in that car and the car swerves over, does the exact same thing, but your thought is, he must have hit a slick of ice. Then what you're going to feel is relief.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So what you choose to think about makes a difference on how you respond emotionally and mentally. It takes practice. It's not something you can do automatically. But I think a lot of times we think things and we don't focus in on really what it is we're telling ourselves. We're just responding to things and not realizing that a lot of times it's our self-talk. It's like the what ifs.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's your self-talk that's spiraling, and that is what's scaring you, what's making you feel so anxious and worried and fearful. It's because you've already in your mind, your body's responding to things that you're believing to be true because you're treating it as if it's happened.
I think when all of us get the diagnosis, we're all so scared that we don't think, we only think of the end part.
Right.
You know, I'm going to die.
Exactly.
So what you're telling us is we just need to stay focused, practice our breathing, restructure how our thoughts so we're not into the negative thoughts, so we have all this beautiful energy instead of being stuck in our little spiral.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That we can take that same energy now and heal.
Right. And again, you have to allow yourself to have some emotions because that's a part of this. So there's going to be times where you just simply need to cry. You simply need to grieve. You need to acknowledge the fact that you're feeling anxious or worried about the future because you don't know what it holds.
Because the worst thing is to suppress your
Exactly.
emotions.
That you do not want to suppress your emotions. That's not helpful either.
Mm-mm.
But at the end of the day, when you've given yourself that time, when you've really allowed yourself to express them, talk about them, journal, go to a counselor, really get them out and sit with them for a while, then at that point, that's when cognitive restructuring can be helpful because you then can start to feel a little bit more sense of control of, okay, I can't change life circumstances, but I can decide how I'm going to adjust to them.
Yes.
Exactly. Beautiful.
Adjustment is, that is cancer. You're learning how to adjust from the second you get the diagnosis.
Exactly. Not only patients, but family too.
Family
are just as much in turmoil and struggling just as much.
Now, I know you really help Mary out a lot, and you help a lot of your patients, but the support system, what is available for the support systems at Nebraska Med?
Well, we have wonderful psychiatry and psychology as well as social work. We have chaplains. And we do have support groups that I believe fully that support groups can be amazing to be able to allow people to share their feelings and not feel so alone in how they're feeling. I think there's some power to that. Mm-hmm. And it's easy then, I think, for people to talk to others that are going through that experience because they get it. Yeah. You know, you can talk to friends, but even if they're well-meaning, they don't really understand what you're going through like another patient.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And that's why we actually try to go, my husband and I, try to go to the lymphoma and leukemia stem cell transplant patient group. I don't know, it's a long title, but I remember when I first started going, it's a weekly meeting, and I just wanted to see somebody else that made it through.
Right.
I was scared, and I believe it was you that suggested that I go. I'm not positive because that was a while back, and it was so nice to go there. And of course, you were holding the meeting. Jody's usually the one that holds the meetings. There's another lady too, and I just felt very comfortable. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there's survivors, and they're 5, 10, 15 years out. I mean, I can do this. It gave me a new sense of hope, and it made me feel a little bit more at ease. And so I'm so glad that that's offered. And I'm sure there's things offered for colon cancer patients too.
There's a colorectal group that the American Cancer Society has. We also have a survivorship group that's for any cancer once a month.
Really?
At the Med Center, yes. And we have opened it up to be more of a facilitated discussion. Because we're finding how powerful that is for people to connect with one another and talk about what concerns they come with to the table. So it's a little more timely that way.
I like the idea of all cancers getting together and talking instead of just one specific group. That is a wonderful idea. In fact, I think we're seeing more and more that cancer is not seen as one specific diagnosis: ovarian, breast, colon cancer, colorectal cancer, leukemia. It's nice that we're seeing cancer as it's one illness.
Right.
You know, and
exactly.
You know, it doesn't matter what comes in front of the word cancer, what description of it. It's the scariest time of your life.
Exactly.
And I did it the exact opposite way. Mary and I are very exact opposite in how we treated our cancer. Although we both were there for each other all the way through. I stayed isolated. Okay. Now after doing this show, it's the last thing I would recommend to anybody is staying isolated. Get involved in the community, and get involved in your cancer, and so that you can see somebody with a positive outlook, that somebody that has.
That made it,
Exactly.
You know, we did the Boxer 500, which was colorectal cancer run walk, and we get to meet some of the really neatest people, but it was everybody had this most beautiful attitude.
Right.
And you could just feel it, the energy, and both of us walked out of that place that day just totally going,
this is awesome.
Well, and you find when you're around other patients is sometimes when you're having a bad day, they're encouraging to you. They have just the right words to say, and maybe they're having an up day. So there's a balance there, and there's something about having somebody bring something to you that is an encouragement that maybe you can't muster up yourself on that day.
I mean, we talk about it all the time, that we used to text back and forth. I would be having a really, what I thought was a bad day. And I would text Mary and go, I'm having a bad day. And she goes, yeah, but I'm in the hospital and I'm throwing up.
Boo-hoo for me.
And then I'm sitting on the other end of it going, well, I guess I really don't feel that bad today.
Yeah, relative, isn't it?
We kind of made it through with each other, and then we just, just being there, just to listen for just a minute.
Exactly.
Put a bright spot on our day. Really was
what
helpful.
we're doing, it's just like you said, a lot of times we do this without even knowing it. When we started this show, we didn't realize too that what we are doing is cognitive restructuring.
Exactly.
But we just
you didn't even know you were doing it. And a
clue.
lot of people find a way of reframing their situation, like you said, thinking about the positive or focusing in on your faith. You're doing a type of cognitive restructuring that's very powerful, and more of that is helpful.
Yeah.
So we got a couple minutes left. Out of all of your wisdom as a social worker with a background in oncology and a background in helping people deal with their emotions with this scary thing we call cancer, lead us with something. What is your wisdom?
I'll be honest with you, and it's going to sound very simplistic, but one day at a time is powerful. Because if you look ahead sometimes you can't see the path. And that for most people is scary, that loss of control and that uncertainty for most people is what brings the most anxiety and fear and sadness. So I would say allow yourself to grieve when you need to grieve. Take it one day at a time and rely on the people in your life that are there to support you, as well as the medical team, because we can become a second family just as much.
No, you are our second family. And a lot of times you become our family, not just second family. I think we really find that people like you really make a big difference in our lives, our support system's lives. And we thank you ever so much for choosing this profession. And I like the thought that you keep saying, give yourself permission. That is the most wonderful thing. Yeah, give yourself permission to have cancer.
Right.
Give yourself permission to heal from cancer.
Exactly.
I
There's
love
no
that.
right or wrong way of coping. You just kind of have to feel your way through and do what's best for you and your family.
And I do have to ask real quick too, do you ever find yourself just kind of like, oh, I need to decompress a little bit after your day? Because it's probably a tough job to have, I would think.
Day in and day out.
What do you do to help yourself? Do you talk to other people?
I do, but I have to be so careful. I really can't talk too much because of confidentiality, so I pray a lot. And I use my faith as a way of helping me to kind of take the burdens that I feel I'm carrying and just hand them over. And for me, that's powerful.
That's great.
Very powerful.
Yeah,
Jody, thank you ever so much for being on our show.
Sure, my pleasure.
And we'll
Thanks for asking
love to
me.
have you back again and hear more about your program.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for being on the show.
Sure.
And I hope you all join us again for another episode of Candid Chats on Cancer with Jamie and Mary.
You guys have a wonderful day.